Montana Territory, June 1876, the morning she was banished, Clara Calloway stood barefoot in the churchyard, her dress torn at the hem and her voice steady as stone. "She is not welcome here," the reverend had said, his fingers wrapped tight around a worn Bible. "Not after what she's done. Not in this town, not around our children." Clara didn't argue. She didn't cry. She only looked at the people she'd grown up with, faces that once brought pies to her mother's porch, that prayed beside her every Sunday and saw nothing but turned backs and cold eyes. She had been the wrong kind of woman, they said. Too bold, too clever, too unashamed. She spoke her mind, she worked her own land, and when the mayor's son took her against her will, it was her fault somehow. Her bruise was her shame, so they sent her away. Clara packed what she could into a canvas sack, strapped it behind the saddle of her mule, and rode out under a sky heavy with clouds. She had nowhere to go, only a direction, west toward the mountains. 3 days later, her mule went lame near a creek in the Bitterroots. She had been walking beside it for hours when a shot cracked the air. "Do not move," a voice said from the trees. Low, rough, male, Clara froze, her hand still on the bridle. A man stepped out from the pine shadows, rifle in hand. His hat was pulled low, jaw rough with stubble, but his eyes were clear and focused. "You with anyone?" he asked. "No, you hurt?" "No." He stared at her a beat longer, then lowered the rifle. "I thought you were someone else," he said. "Apologies." Clara nodded once. "You always greet strangers like that. When they sneak up on my camp," he said, gesturing behind him. "You passed it." She looked past him, smoke curling from a small fire, a lean-to built against a rock face, a black horse tethered nearby. "Your mule's limping," he added. "You will not get far like that." "I know," she said. "It's not your concern." He stepped closer, not threatening, just steady. "Name's Asa Adler, Clara Calloway," he nodded. "Stay the night, fix your animal's leg, I have coffee." She hesitated. But she was exhausted, and the air was dropping fast with evening cold. "All right," she said. By nightfall, Clara was wrapped in a blanket by Asa's fire, cradling a tin cup of coffee. Her mule was resting near the lean-to, its leg wrapped tight with Asa's spare bandages. He had not asked questions. He had not looked at her like the others did. "You heading anywhere?" he asked. "Anywhere they will not throw stones," she said. He nodded like he understood. "I have a cabin, about a day's ride west. You can rest there if you want." "I will not ask questions." "Why would you help me?" He met her eyes. "Because someone should have." They rode out the next morning. Asa gave her his horse and walked beside it, leading the mule. They traveled in silence mostly, but it was not heavy. It felt real. Like the wind through the trees, the crunch of hooves on dry earth. That night, in the clearing where his cabin stood, Clara saw what kind of man Asa was. The cabin was sturdy, hand-built, with a garden behind it and a small barn. Inside, the wood stove was warm, the shelves lined with jars and tools. A man who could live alone but did not live small. "Why do you live out here?" she asked as he stirred stew over the fire. "Was a cavalry scout," he said. "Saw too much. Wanted some quiet." She watched the way his shoulders moved, the way his hands worked. Strong but not rough. She wondered how many people had ever asked him where he hurt. That night, she lay on a cot near the fire, listening to the wind creak the roof beams. Her body sore, her heart raw. But not afraid, days passed. Then weeks. Clara helped him plant beans, mend fences. She learned the rhythm of his quiet life. She found peace in the work, in the silence between them. One morning, she was feeding the chickens when she heard a child's cry. She turned fast, heart clenching. A girl no taller than her hips stood at the edge of the woods, barefoot, face streaked with dirt. Behind her, a boy not much older, maybe 7, held her hand tight. "Help," he said. Clara ran to them. "Where are your parents?" "Gone," said the boy. "They told us to run. There were men." "With guns." Clara knelt beside them, her voice soft. "What are your names?" "I am Micah," he said. "She is Molly." She scooped Molly into her arms and led them to the cabin. Asa was already outside, rifle in hand. His eyes narrowed when he saw the children. "They were running," Clara said. "Said men attacked their place." He exhaled through his nose. "We will keep them safe." That night, Clara watched Asa tuck them in. He was gentle, careful, like he had known loss. Later, when the children slept, she asked, "Did you have a family?" "I had a sister," he said. "She died in Kansas." "Fever?" Clara touched his hand. I am sorry. He looked at her then, really looked. So am I, he said. Their fingers stayed touching. The next week, Clara rode into the nearest town, 20 miles west, to ask about the children. She came back with news no family claimed them. The sheriff said it was likely raiders. No one would be looking. They are ours now, Asa said simply. Clara smiled. Seems they are. Summer rolled in soft and golden. Clara found herself laughing more. She caught Asa watching her when she swept her hair back. She watched him when he chopped wood, shirt damp with sweat, jaw set. One evening, after the children had gone to sleep, Clara looked up from her sewing to find Asa watching her again. "What is it?" she asked. "I was wrong," he said. "About what? You are not the wrong kind of woman, Clara." She stood slowly, walked to him. He touched her cheek, rough thumb tracing her jaw. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known." She leaned in. "And you are the only man who ever saw me." His mouth found hers firm and warm and honest. She breathed into him, hands gripping his shirt. He kissed her like he had waited years to do it. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. "I do not want to leave," she whispered. "You will never have to," he said, and she believed him. Late July brought a dry heat that settled into the valley like breath held too long. The garden wilted by noon, and the hens stayed close to the shaded corner of the coop. Clara tied her hair up with a strip of muslin and kept to the shade when she could. When she couldn't, she worked until her skin turned the color of dust, and her arms ached in the good, honest way that reminded her she was still building something. Asa had left at dawn for the trading post 2 ridges over, taking what little they had to barter dried beans, a pair of worn boots Clara had mended, and a bundle of pelts he'd trapped through spring. He said he'd be back after sundown, depending on the river crossing. Clara didn't mind the quiet. She used it to clean out the root cellar, sort through the last of the preserved fruit, and patch the children's shirts where elbows had worn through. Molly followed her like a shadow, dragging her rag-stuffed doll by the hem of its skirt. Micah took to the woods with a bundle of snares Asa had shown him how to set. When she heard the wagon wheels clatter up the path near dusk, Clara wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out to meet him. Asa climbed down slow, his shirt damp and his beard catching the gold of the setting light. "I brought flour and a bit of salt," he said, pulling the sack off the wagon, "and something else." Clara reached for the bundle he handed her. Inside was a length of cotton deep blue with tiny white flowers. "For you," he said. "Figured it might feel good to wear something new." She ran her thumb along the edge of the fabric. "You didn't have to, I know, but I wanted to." Micah came running from the trees, hoisting a rabbit by the feet. "Got one," he said, grinning wide. Asa ruffled the boy's hair. "You'll feed us yet." They cooked the rabbit over the fire that night, and Clara made biscuits with the fresh flour. After the children were asleep, she stepped out onto the porch, the air still warm against her arms. Asa joined her without speaking. He handed her a tin cup, the whiskey low and amber. "You always drink after a ride?" she asked. "Only when I make it back." "Something happened." He leaned against the post, one hand resting on his belt. "Ran into a man who knew me from the war." She sipped the whiskey. "That bad?" He remembered me better than I remembered myself. Said I saved his leg outside of Shiloh. I don't recall it. Clara looked at him sideways. "You think he lied?" "No, I think I forgot who I was for a while." "Might be just as well." She was quiet, then said, "I used to think I knew myself, back when I believed folks would stand by me when it mattered." Asa turned toward her, his voice low. "They failed you. That doesn't mean you failed." She set the cup down. "It's not that simple." "No," he said. "It's not, but people don't get to decide your worth based on their cowardice." She met his eyes. There was nothing soft in his gaze, but something steady, something she trusted. "I want to stay," she said. "Not just for now. I want to be here with you, with them." "If you'll have me," Asa nodded just once. "I already do." Behind them, the cabin flickered with firelight. The children murmured in sleep. The earth smelled of warm pine and ash. Clara reached for his hand. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. The stars came out slow, one by one, and neither of them let go. August slipped in quiet, like a breath held between storms. The days grew longer still, the wind carrying the dry scent of pine needles crushed under boot and hoof. Clara rose before the sun most mornings now, her hands shaping dough by lantern light while the cabin still breathed with sleep. She had begun sewing the blue cotton Asa had given her, cutting it carefully into a dress that would fit her new life's strong seams, easy to move in, meant for working and walking and holding children close when they cried out in the night. Asa had been fencing the northeast edge of the pasture where the soil dipped and softened after a rain. He'd taken Micah with him that morning, teaching the boy how to brace a post and check the lines for slack. Clara watched them go from the porch, Molly tugging at her apron, asking if they could pick berries near the creek. They returned with their fingers stained and a basket half full. Clara rinsed the fruit in the basin and set a pot over the fire, her cheeks flushed from the sun and the climb back uphill with Molly on her hip. Supper would be fresh bread and wild berry preserves. When Asa and Micah came back, their boots were caked in mud and their shirts clung to their backs. Asa washed at the pump behind the barn, rolling his sleeves up to the elbow. Clara met him there with a clean cloth. "There's a tear on your shoulder seam," she said, brushing dirt from the fabric. "I'll fix it tonight." He took the cloth from her hand but didn't wipe his face right away. "You always do that, notice the small things." She looked up at him, the air thick with heat and the smell of damp earth. "I notice what matters." He folded the cloth in his hand. "I passed an old trail today, one I used when I was still riding dispatch. Found a broken wagon wheel near the tree line. Looked fresh." Clara's brow tightened. "Close to here, too close. Could be travelers, could be something else." She didn't ask what he meant, she already knew. That night, Clara helped Molly into bed and listened as Micah told Asa what he'd learned about knots and wood grain. She kept to the edge of the firelight afterward, watching the boys talk with ease. When Asa finally met her gaze, the room had gone still except for the low pop of the coals. "I never asked," she said, voice low, "but I wonder sometimes what kind of man you were before this place." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I was angry at the war, at what it took, at myself for surviving when others didn't." And now he looked at her fully. "I hammer fence posts instead of rifles. I teach a boy how to tie a square knot. I come home to a woman who sees me for who I am now, not who I was." Clara stepped closer, her bare feet quiet on the floorboards. "I never thought I'd be seen again." "Not really." He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You're more than seen, Clara." That night, she didn't return to her cot. She lay beside him while the wind moved through the trees beyond the shutters. He didn't reach for her like a man claiming something. He held her like a man who knew the weight of silence and chose her instead. Morning came with fog settled low over the hills. Asa rose early, hitching the wagon with quiet hands. Clara joined him with Molly still drowsy on her hip. "You riding out?" she asked, just to the trail. "I want to see if that wagon's been moved. I'll be back before noon." She nodded, laying her hand on the edge of the wagon. "Be sure of your tracks. If it's someone passing through, that's one thing. If it's not—" "I'll be careful," he said. He was gone less than 2 hours. When he returned, his mouth was set tight, his eyes darker than they'd been. "There's boot prints. Small group. Could be scouts, maybe 3 or 4. They didn't take the wagon, just left it." Clara steadied herself. "You think they'll come this way? If they're looking for food or shelter, yes." She didn't ask if they were dangerous. He wouldn't have come back so fast if they weren't. "I'll take first watch tonight," he said, unhooking the rifle from the wagon bed. Clara gathered the children inside, her movements sure and quiet. She packed a small satchel with bread, dried meat, and a canteen, tucking it beneath the bed, just in case. That night she didn't sleep, not fully. She watched Asa through the cabin window, his silhouette still as a carving on the porch rail, eyes fixed on the tree line. Before dawn, she stepped out with a cup of hot chicory. "You should rest," she said. He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. "I will. When I know we're safe, you're not alone in this." He looked at her, the first light catching in the lines around his eyes. "I know, and that's what makes it different." She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. The land was quiet, but not still. And together, they waited for whatever came. By early September, the wind had shifted. It carried a bite now, even in the afternoons, and the yellowing tips of the cottonwoods whispered of the coming cold. Clara had begun drying herbs from the garden, hanging them in bundles above the stove, and teaching Molly simple stitches with a scrap of muslin. Micah, when not shadowing Asa, had taken to carving small animals from leftover kindling. His latest, a squirrel with a too long tail, sat proudly on the windowsill. The strangers hadn't come. Asa checked the trail most mornings, circling out past the ridge and back again by midday. Whatever boots had pressed into the earth had long since faded, and there'd been no sign of movement beyond deer tracks and the occasional rustle of a fox. Still, he kept his rifle close. Clara knew better than to call it fear. Asa wasn't a man who lived in fear, but he remembered things. And men who remembered were careful. That afternoon, while Molly napped beside a folded quilt and Micah read aloud from a battered primer they'd found months back, Clara stood with Asa near the barn, her hands red from plucking late apples. "Fence held through the last wind," he said, wiping dust from his brow. "You sound surprised," she said, glancing at the slope where they'd reinforced the posts. "I'm not used to things holding." She leaned on the gate, her voice quiet. "I am," he looked at her, brows pulled in thought. "Since when?" "Since I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me what I deserved." Asa rested his arms on the gate beside her. "You ever think about going back to the town?" He waited. "No," she said, "not once. They were wrong about you. They weren't the first." She turned to him. "But you were the first one who didn't need convincing." His hand brushed hers, rough knuckles catching against her skin. "I saw what you carried, didn't need to set it down to know it was real." She didn't pull away. "Do you think it's always going to be like this?" she asked. "Looking over our shoulders, maybe not always, but we'll be ready if it is." That night they sat outside while the children slept, the lantern casting soft light against the porch boards. The moon was sharp, high above the pines, and the wind carried the dry hush of grass turning brittle. Clara traced the rim of her tin cup with one finger. "I used to want more than this, or maybe I just thought I did." "What changed?" She tilted her head toward the open land. "I didn't know what peace looked like." Asa leaned back, his chair creaking beneath him. "And now I know it's a boy's laughter when his carving splits clean. It's a girl asleep with her doll tucked beneath her chin. It's your shoulders easing when you step through the door." He didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was steady. "I want to build something that lasts. You already are." "No," he said. "Not just these walls, I mean us, this." Clara met his eyes. "Then let's build it." They rose before first light the next morning, the air crisp and smelled faintly of frost. Clara wrapped Micah's scarf tighter and helped him into his boots. Asa saddled the horses. He decided to take the boy into town for supplies, to teach him the barter, the route, the faces worth remembering. Clara stayed behind with Molly, who had caught a cough from the changing air. As they rode out, Asa turned once in the saddle. Clara raised her hand, not in parting, but in promise. By dusk, the wagon rolled back up the path, Asa and Micah with it. The boy's cheeks were flushed with wind and pride, a small sack of sugar in his lap. Asa handed Clara a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" she asked. "Deed." She unfolded it, brow furrowed. "Registered the land," he said, "under both our names." She stared at his face, her breath catching. "You did that without asking?" "I didn't think I had to." Clara held the paper tight in her hands. "You didn't." He stepped forward, his voice low. "This place is yours as much as mine, always was." She swallowed. "Then let's plant deep roots." And with no more words, he kissed her quiet, firm, lasting as the sun dipped behind the hills and the wind lifted the scent of harvest into the darkening air. The first snow came early, brushing the tops of the pines in pale powder and leaving a hush over the land that Clara could feel in her ribs. She stood behind the cabin, pinning the last of the washed linens to the line despite the cold, her breath ghosting the air. Molly played nearby, dragging a stick through the light dusting on the ground, bundled in a wool coat Asa had traded for in late September. The girl's cough had passed, leaving only a faint rasp when she ran too hard. Inside, Micah crouched near the hearth, concentrating on a new carving, this one a horse with legs just thick enough not to splinter. His tongue pressed into the corner of his mouth as he worked, unaware of Clara watching him through the window. She smiled, then turned back to the wind, the wood clothespin biting through the fabric into her fingers. Asa came up the hill from the ravine where he'd been setting traps, his rifle slung across his back, and a brace of snowshoe hairs hanging from one hand. When he reached the yard, he spoke without raising his voice. "I saw smoke west of the ridge, small, just one fire." Clara didn't move from the line. "Do you think it's them again?" "No, too far off the trail, could be a hunting party. Could be a family passing through." She met his eyes then, the wind tugging at her skirts. "Do we offer them food if they come close enough to ask?" That night, they roasted one of the hares and boiled potatoes with sage from the bundle drying above the stove. Clara sat beside Asa on the bench, their thighs touching, not speaking much while the children played a quiet game with pebbles on the hearthstones. Later, after the children had gone to bed and the fire had burned low, Asa reached into the small drawer beneath the shelves and pulled out a folded piece of oilskin. He opened it carefully, revealing a worn strip of leather with a small brooch nestled in the center silver, shaped like a mountain flower. "I found this the same year I built the cabin," he said. "Didn't know what I was saving it for." Clara turned it over in her hand, the metal cool against her palm. "It's beautiful, it's yours." She looked at him, her voice steady. "Why now?" "Because it's the first winter I'm not waiting for something to fall apart." She nodded once, then leaned in and kissed him, slow and certain. Afterward, she pressed the brooch to her chest, then tucked it into the folds of her apron like it had always belonged there. The days shortened. By midwinter, the sun barely cleared the trees before dipping again, and the snow deepened in drifts against the cabin walls. Clara and Asa moved through the days in rhythm. He chopped wood, she mended clothes, they taught Micah his letters in the evenings. Molly curled against Clara's side with a wool doll clutched to her chest. One late afternoon, Asa returned from checking the traps with a stranger behind him. The man, older, cheeks wind-burned, walked with a limp and led a young woman bundled in a patched shawl. Clara met them on the porch, her face unreadable. "They were camped just east of the creek," Asa said. Wagon wheels snapped. "They've got a baby." The young mother, no older than 20, looked up, her eyes hollow. "We ran out of flour. My husband's gone back to fetch help." Clara stepped aside. "Bring her in." They stayed 3 nights. Clara gave them cornbread and stew, showed the girl how to wrap the baby warmer, and helped mend a tear in her skirt. Asa repaired the wagon's axle with Micah's help, and when the father returned on the 4th morning with a borrowed team, Clara packed them bread and dried apples. As they pulled away, the young mother turned in the wagon seat. "I didn't know there were still places like this." Clara watched them disappear down the slope. "There weren't. We made one." Spring came slow. When the ice finally broke on the creek, Asa built a new chicken pen and Clara planted rows of beans and cabbages. Micah helped dig channels for runoff, and Molly carried stones in her skirt to line the garden path. The cabin grew full with the sound of living boots on floorboards, laughter at supper, the scrape of a hoe in the thawing soil. One evening, Clara stood at the edge of the pasture while Asa repaired a rail. The wind moved through the grass, soft now, smelling of damp earth. "I've been thinking," she said. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "If we built another room on the cabin," she continued, "we'd have space to take in others. Families passing through, people like we were." He nodded. "You want to build a haven? I want to build a home that doesn't end with us." Asa set down his hammer and walked to her, his boots sinking into the soft ground. He took her face in both hands, dirt still under his nails. "You already did," he said. "And I'll build the rest with you." They kissed there in the field, the sun warm on their backs, the land wide and waiting. Years passed, but the cabin never stood empty. Strangers came, some stayed. Clara taught women how to grow herbs, how to stitch seams that wouldn't give. Asa taught boys how to track game, how to build with their hands. They raised Micah and Molly as their own, watched them grow tall and sure, watched them make their own choices, kind ones. And through it all, through snowfall and harvest, through long nights and bright mornings, Clara and Asa stayed side by side. They never spoke of the things they'd lost, only of what they were making. a life not built from what they had been given, but from what they chose to give each other. And it held, just as they had,